Hello, I'm Alex Pearson in for Michael Coren. It is Family Day here in Ontario, a made-up holiday made up by one-time Liberal leader Dalton McGuinty. It was one of those vote for me and I'll give you a day off gimmicks back in the 2007 provincial election. A lot of folks don't get today off because it's not recognized at the federal level. So for a lot of folks today, it's just another day at the office. But if you're one of those lucky provincial public sector folks, the folks who've been backing the Liberals, then you're likely chilling and getting paid for it. So it makes sense why the Liberals chose this as a quick vote grab. That's their style. Give out some baubles and see who bites. And it's usually the unions doing most of the biting. In the recent Niagara by-election, just days before it was called, the Liberals did what they do best: give stuff away. They announced $100 million in freebies to the wine industry and for a nifty new hospital. But this time, their buddies weren't biting, nope. The unions were sending a message, and they found someone else to back: Andrea Horwath. And just like that, the Liberals were trounced out of the riding after a decade.
But I got up this morning. I'm the Premier of Ontario. I've got a terrific team, and it is my job to make sure that we continue to implement our plan.
Yeah, Premier Wynne was quick to point out she's still the boss. Nothing's changed. Oh, but it has. The writing is on the wall. The Liberal union love affair is on rocky grounds, and if Wynne doesn't get her house in order, they know they can fall back to their other BFF, Andrea Horwath, the one who will give them what they demand. And as we inch closer to a general election in Ontario, I suspect as early as April, you're going to start hearing a lot more of those union demands. On Saturday, Sid Ryan, president of the Ontario Federation of Labour and longtime union leader and activist, was out demanding his demands. He's pushing for minimum wage to go to $14. Premier Wynne already committed to moving it up to $11, but nope. The unions, they're demanding $14. Way above what inflation reflects and way more than a private sector business can afford. But for the unions, it all makes total sense. And it will mean raises for all. So consider yourself warned, Ms. Horwath.
We're sending a signal to the Premier. The campaign has not gone away, it has not stopped, and it'll be part and parcel of the upcoming election whenever they call it.
You see, we don't really know what the NDP leader would do with Ontario if elected. I mean, she's done a lot of consulting with Ontarians, but otherwise she's been silent on the issue of minimum wage, a core policy for her Give Me More base. She's said nothing on taxes or her stance on CPP payroll taxes, job creation, or how she would lower exploding hydro costs, or would she? She has literally been silent on actual policy, and so far it's worked. She's managed to build her profile by winning a few by-elections and doing micro-policy deals in exchange for propping up a corrupt party, accused, of course, of mismanaging almost everything and selling off a couple of power plants for $1 billion. She did manage to force policy that lowered insurance rates by 15%, made for some nifty headlines. But the reality for most, well, the rates rose before the policy became official, so no real savings there. Most see Ms. Horwath as the nice one. It does not seem to register that she is the very reason that the Liberals remain in power. Now, the unions are locking in on her for their future, and a $14 minimum wage may just be the price they demand.
If our political parties thought that we would just take a 75% increase and disappear, they're sadly mistaken.
We believe that the minimum wage should be set 10% above the poverty line using the low-income measure.
It is, after all, these union folks who handed her a win. They had boots on the ground in Niagara Falls and brought voters to the polls. In their minds, Horwath owes them. On Friday, Tim Hudak put those same unions on notice, calling out the Working Families Coalition in a bid to expose union influence on the democratic process. Hudak, you see, is enemy number one to these guys. He's proposing modernizing labor laws, transparency, and accountability, especially when it comes to dues. They'll fearmonger it's union busting when in fact it would give workers more protection. But hey, The last thing union bosses want is transparency or workers to have rights.
I wish the Working Families Coalition would actually come out and say what they're all about, and that's big labor, who have the sole purpose of trying to divert taxpayer dollars into their own pockets, into private members' hands, and away from public services. And I will hold the Liberals and the NDP accountable for constantly caving in budget after budget, bill after bill, to big labor demands. We just can't afford it.
Well, this is who Tim Hudak is talking about. It's called the Working Families Coalition, made up hardly of any families. It's 14 of the biggest special interest union bosses, teachers, construction and auto workers unions, etc. But many have a very incestuous and very profitable relationship with the Liberal Party. Take the guy running it, Patrick Dillon. He's had several top appointments within the Liberal Party, sitting on Kathleen Wynne's transit panel, which wants to raise a 10-cent gas tax, the WSIB board, and several others. Each of his appointments are paid for by the Liberals, also known as you, the taxpayers. Or take Dalton McGuinty's former chief of staff and Liberal campaign chair, Don Guy. He also consults for Working Families Coalition and made almost $2 million in consulting fees. So you get an idea of how this works and how it will affect you, except you don't really know this because it's all done very secretly. When election season nears, the Working Families Coalition, they rev up the hate and spend millions. $10 million back in 2013 alone on attack ads against the Conservatives. That way, the Liberals don't look like they're being mean and nasty, and they can spend money elsewhere on election ads. Then, in return, the unions get their membership to the polls and are rewarded by the Liberals when they win. Of the 4 public sector unions supporting working families, all got raises thanks to McGuinty and Wynne. The teachers alone got 25% in raises since 2003. Anyone who thinks unions aren't running Ontario are either in complete denial or are blind to reality. They spend such enormous amounts of propaganda, are very involved in the electoral process, and then they sit down across the table negotiating with whomever becomes premier. This should outrage you, if not scare you. Last Thursday's by-elections was a warning shot for Premier Wynne. She's their leader of choice, but if they can't get her to do what they want, they will back Andrea Horwath. She may not have any policy that we know of, but that's okay. The unions know they can set the agenda for her.
This was a very difficult decision for us to make. I know that my coworkers put in a lot of hard work, whether they were for or against the union. But in the end, I think that with the decision that was made last night, I believe it was best for Volkswagen and for the city of Chattanooga.
I truly am thrilled for the employees at Volkswagen and thrilled for our community.
While unions in this country continue trying to assert their power across the border, union clout is slipping, and slipping fast. The UAW, one of the biggest auto workers' unions, was dealt a devastating blow, losing a vote in the South, an area they desperately need to expand their members in order to remain relevant. Volkswagen basically gift-wrapped this vote for them, and yet in the end, the workers voted against it. Peter Marizzi, business professor at the University of Maryland, joins us now. Thanks so much for being with us. They couldn't have made it easier for these guys, and yet the workers said no. Why?
Well, simply, there's the specter of Detroit. Detroit has had the kind of government that you've had in Ontario for a lot longer, and it's in bankruptcy. The city is literally depopulating and becoming a lawless place. The old Dodge City was a tame atmosphere compared to Detroit. That weighs very heavily on the minds of the folks in Chattanooga. Also, in Chattanooga, there was once a vibrant textile and steel forging industries, and they were heavily unionized, and now they are gone. And that weighs heavily on folks' minds as well. You know, they get a couple of extra dollars an hour if they go with the UAW, but in the end, they lose their jobs.
President Obama was quick to come out just during the vote or previous to the vote, saying that this was all political on the part of the Republicans. Should he have been speaking up, and what tone does this say?
Well, it's perfectly reasonable for him to say it. After all, he is in the vest pocket of the AFL-CIO. He basically gives them what they want, much like the Premier of Ontario or the unions would like. And as a consequence, we can expect that. But for the last 70 years, the AFL-CIO has made war on every Republican that runs for public office, just about every one. So are they surprised that Republicans opposed unions coming to Chattanooga, collecting union dues to pay for political action committees to campaign against them? I mean, come on, wake up.
So where does it go from here? I mean, the membership itself has fallen 75% since 1979. UAW absolutely had to get into this area to increase its base. Are they dead? Is this just a sign of things to come?
Well, part of the problem with unions is not just the public service unions and their terrible demands that are bankrupting, for example, the state of Rhode Island, but rather their involvement in lots of liberal causes. You know, these Southern industrial workers are culturally conservative. They like their guns. They're not likely to be very pro-abortion, certainly not public funding for abortion or gay marriage and things like that. And the AFL-CIO is very strident in supporting these progressive causes. And this has nothing to do with representing these workers. So think about it. The thing that they really have to do is to get involved in politics in the South. And for them to do that, they have to moderate themselves politically as much as they moderate their demands.
You know, we have unions up here. Toyota, for instance, private company doing very well, creates jobs. The workers are happy. We've got unions trying to get in. They're holding a crucial vote in the next couple of months. I mean, are they watching what goes on in the U.S.? Is it a sign for Canadian unions as well that many think the jig may be up?
Well, if I were a Canadian worker at Toyota, I'd ask myself, what are the chances of my job going to the American South if I vote yes for the Canadian UAW? Because, frankly, compared to the Canadian UAW, the American UAW is a bunch of pussycats. I mean, that is a very aggressive union. It's always operated under the assumption that the jobs have to stay in Canada, and with NAFTA, they don't.
A lot of the unions are merging, though, because they're losing so much of their base. Do you suspect that the UAW then will have to merge with another, or do they simply have to work with what they've got?
They're going to have to work with what they've got, I would think. They're a fairly expansive union. In addition to the auto workers, they have the people at Caterpillar and so forth. There are 400,000 of them, but they do face a declining membership simply because even a rejuvenated General Motors and Ford will be able to make cars going forward with fewer and fewer people. They really have to change their stripes. But if you just look at the posturing, you know, a couple of years ago I had dinner with the president of the AFL-CIO and his lieutenants, and they were so militant and they were so harsh. It was like I was going back into history. I was in a time machine, and, you know, we were back in the 30s and 40s organizing U.S. Steel. They haven't woken up to the fact that workers have an understanding management today that doesn't want to abuse them, that pays them very well, and listens to them. So they're going to have to change what they do.
Yeah, amazing those labor laws actually work. You don't need a union. Peter, we've got it there. Thanks so much for joining us.
Take care.